In July of 2020, I was in the car with my dad. It was a typical sunny summer day, nothing out of the ordinary. But as we approached the highway, a tow truck with what to me looked like a life-size version of a toy tank slowly drove past us. And then my dad's eyes lit up and he said, look, Sophia, do you know what that is? It's an M26 tank. Well, I knew it was a tank, but other than its familiarity from World War II movies, all it looked like to me was an item wildly out of place on Fifth Avenue. So I said, yeah, it looks like a toy tank. And then my dad said, oh no, it's no toy. It can destroy everything. I've seen it destroy entire cities. That's when I knew a very rare window of opportunity had been opened. My dad is Lebanese, and he lived through and fought in the Lebanese Civil War, one of the bloodiest civil conflicts of the 20th century. My dad never talks about his experiences in the war, and only on very rare occasions do opportunities for conversations like this happen. I knew I needed to proceed carefully if I wanted the conversation to continue, so I thought about all of the different things I could ask to keep this window open. And I remembered that my dad has been almost completely deaf in one of his ears for my entire life. So I decided to ask, is that how you lost your hearing? Through a tank explosion? My dad said, no, actually I lost my hearing when I was walking on patrol. I was walking on a road next to a tall wall, and a bombshell hit the top of that wall. A piece of shrapnel sliced me, right here. And I remember as he said that, his hand left the steering wheel and he reached up to touch the back of his skull. And then he said, there was blood everywhere. I paused and asked if he was alone. He said no, he was in a group of 5 young men, and 3 of them died that day. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, I'm sorry, Dad. And he replied, that was 47 years ago. I was 17 then. And then the conversation ended. That window back in time had closed, and I was left with this monumental information about my dad. I didn't know about any of that trauma until that very ordinary day driving in the car, when a random environmental cue, like a tank on a tow truck, flung wide open a window in time. And that conversation got me thinking about all of these different windows in time that have opened throughout my life. I'm the daughter of 2 immigrants. My mom is Taiwanese, my dad is Lebanese. And growing up, windows in time would only open up for happy memories. Memories of food, family, and fun, memories in exciting places. Places like Taiwan, places in Lebanon, places that were for my parents back home. Those memories got me so curious about where my parents were from, and that curiosity about where my family's from ended up being hyper-reinforced by the environment that I grew up in. I grew up in a neighborhood called Bexley. It's a predominantly white suburb of Columbus. I went to a predominantly white school, and most of my friends and teachers were white. And for that reason, mine and my family's racial identity is something that I have been acutely aware of for as long as I can remember. Everybody around us was always asking that enduring question. Where are you all from again? Where are you from is something called the perpetual foreigner microaggression. It's just one way bias and discrimination manifests on a daily basis for folks in my communities, the AAPI and SWANA communities. The perpetual foreigner microaggression is a societal construct rooted in racism and colonialism that teaches all of us from a young age that racial and or ethnic minorities will always be seen as the societal other in white Anglo-Saxon dominant societies like the United States. So no matter what the intention was behind the where are you from question, the assumption always was that I wasn't from here. And even though I was actually born here in Columbus at the Ohio State University Medical Center, I also fell into the idea that maybe I wasn't supposed to be from here, because clearly no one around me believed that I could be from here. And that attention to where I'm from only grew in intensity as I got older. I remember growing up, kids on the playground would run up to me, yank their eyes back in a slant, and say things like ching chang chong, mocking Chinese. Those are the same kids, a decade later after 9/11, that would call my dad a terrorist and ask if I was a Chinese communist. Teachers were starting to turn to me in class and asking me if I could weigh in on the cultural practices of ancient China and Muslim caliphates. And that tokenism became so extreme that by my 12th grade year, my world history teacher turned to me in front of the entire class and asked, "Sophia, do you know if they do female genital mutilation in Lebanon?" And expected me to actually have an answer. Because of all that racism and tokenism, I felt hopelessly misunderstood. Not only was I being treated as an outsider, but I felt like a pretty lousy outsider, because by these people's standards, I didn't really know anything about my cultural heritage. I could barely stand up to the racist remarks of my peers and my teachers. I felt inadequate, and I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to finally figure out the answer to where I'm from. So I took that pursuit of where I'm from with me to college. I majored in Chinese and Arabic here at Ohio State, and I ended up traveling to Lebanon and Taiwan many times. I actually lived and worked in Taiwan after I graduated. And where it was so important for me to connect with my roots like that, I was starting to realize something that really shook me to my core. I didn't belong in either of those countries. In fact, I was starting to feel more and more American with each trip I took. And that really confused me. Where I'm from was the basis of my entire identity development up until that point. And in the end, around the age of 25, despite all of that socialized messaging around me that I was really from somewhere else, I discovered that where I'm really from is Columbus, Ohio. I was beginning to understand that I had based my entire identity development on the perpetual foreigner stereotype. I too had fallen into that trap that I couldn't be from here, that I couldn't be completely American because I'm not white. That pursuit of where I'm from, it no longer felt personal. And for a long time, I felt conflicted and ashamed for having internalized white supremacy and colonialism for so long. And after all that effort, I didn't feel any closer to understanding myself, my family, or my communities. My identity felt completely lost. But around the same time I was starting to realize where I'm from is the wrong question to be asking myself, those windows back in time I mentioned earlier, they started opening more frequently, and my family were sharing more and more memories of pain and trauma, memories of the horrors of war, the suffocation of poverty, and the relentless racism they faced in this country. And as all this was happening, I realized I had stopped asking myself where I'm from because I had started asking when. When did all of this happen? When did this trauma begin? And when would the cycle of trauma finally end for my family? And that was significant reframing for me. Once I started to reject that colonial construct of where I'm from, I dedicated myself instead to understanding when I'm from. When am I from is a deeply personal question, and I created it to help me understand identity through familial memory and experience instead of objectification and othering. And in my new exploration of this question, when I'm from, I started learning about things like intergenerational trauma, resilience, and healing. Intergenerational trauma is a phenomenon that happens when unhealed trauma from previous generations impacts the health and well-being of future generations. And that can happen when a family member experiences a traumatic event and then passes on to their descendants those adverse behaviors and emotional reactions that that family member developed to cope with their initial trauma. So I know that that's a lot of theoretical and abstract language, and it can be difficult to relate to. So I want to provide an example from my own life of how this question, when I'm from, and intergenerational trauma have helped me understand myself and my family better, and have ultimately helped me reframe my understanding of identity in general. This is my maternal grandpa. He immigrated to Taiwan in the 1940s during the Chinese Civil War. My grandpa endured a time of extreme political violence and paranoia in Taiwan. He used to recall military raids of his medical school, where soldiers would storm his dormitory in the middle of the night and call out the names of his classmates suspected of supporting communism. Those classmates were taken to the school stadium and executed. My grandpa learned very early on that to stay alive meant to stay quiet, to keep your head down, and to never disobey an authority figure. Because my grandpa endured this trauma, he taught my mom and uncle to do the same as him. Stay quiet, keep your head down, don't disobey authority. Because as new immigrants in this country, their very existence here was dependent on whether or not an authority figure would approve their visas. My mom then internalized this fear and out of concern for me and my sister, taught us to do the same. And where I do have to say my parents both taught us to speak up when injustices like racism happen, my mom also taught us with the same severity as my grandpa to never disobey authority figures like teachers or supervisors. My dad, another survivor of war, also reinforced that message because in his experiences, he learned the same lessons about what it could mean if you disobey authority. That message about disobeying authority remains so strong 3 generations later that when I have to confront an authority figure, my heart rate shoots up, my body temperature increases, I often become nauseous, and I have to stop myself from spiraling into this place where I believe I've been marked, I'm going to get fired, and that as a woman of color, I won't be able to find another job. That's the same fear, a fear that originated in one family member's experience manifesting across 3 different generations, 3 different eras in time. I still feel the impact of that fear in my body almost 100 years later. These are the impacts of intergenerational trauma. Growing up, my fear and anxiety of authority was always framed to me as cultural. Well, Asian culture is pretty submissive, right? That's something that's perpetuated in the media, that's been said to me by friends and peers, and has been said to me by white therapists that I've seen in the past. And this is just another example of how society is constantly orienting my attention away from my family's humanity and toward our position as the societal other. What I've also learned through understanding intergenerational trauma is that my family is remarkably resilient. My grandpa went on to graduate from medical school and became a physician in Taiwan and also here in the United States. My mom and dad are both retired from 40-year-long careers, and they've lived full lives in this country. And here I am, still speaking out, still learning every single day how to better manage anxiety. Because I can name the traumas and understand them, I see now not just these cultural differences like a strict immigrant parent or an unexplainable cultural norm. What I see now is the strength and courage it took for every single one of my family members to live with trauma and survive. That's the power of this question, when am I from? When am I from has allowed me for the first time in my life to decolonize my identity away from place and othering, and instead find my identity inside the human beings that created me and came before me. When Am I From has allowed me to cultivate genuine understanding and compassion for my family and their experiences. And ultimately, it's helped me forgive for the traumas I experienced in my own childhood. I realized that my trauma is a continuation of a history of unhealed trauma in my family. And with that realization came resolve. If I can name the trauma, then I can do my best to understand it. And if I can understand it, then I can heal. And maybe my family can too. I've started initiating active and intentional opportunities to create moments of intergenerational healing for my family by learning how to create dialogue, learning how to ask questions in those difficult moments, like that moment in the car with my dad, learning how to practice forgiveness, and creating intentional moments for intergenerational joy for me and my family to experience together. Those moments of intergenerational joy become new memories that contribute to when I'm from, for my future self, and future generations of our family. And that's my real hope, that through offering new questions for identity exploration, like when am I from, folks in my AAPI and SWANA communities and other communities of color can begin to decolonize our identity away from place, objectification, and othering, and instead reclaim our sense of self through understanding family, community, and ultimately finding empowerment as we reconcile past, present, and future. So to answer my own question, when am I from? I'm from moments that spawned intergenerational trauma. I'm from 1950, when my grandpa was living in fear of being arrested and blacklisted. I'm from 1975, when my mom walked the halls of West High School, enduring relentless racism from her peers. I'm from 1976, on that day that my dad was hit by a piece of shrapnel and lost his hearing. And I'm from 2021. When we lost two of my uncles and my grandmother to the brutality of COVID. I am also from moments of intergenerational healing. I'm from 2006, when my dad, my sister, and I went back to Lebanon for the first time in a decade. I'm from 2013, when my mom came to visit me in Taiwan. She shared so many of her life experiences with me that helped me understand her and my own childhood better. And I'm from 2022, when we celebrated my nephew's 9th birthday. We see the future of our family in him. This is when I'm from. When are you from? Thank you.